Selma Avenue, and on the right side of the screen is El Centro Avenue. Now you can't see it in this map, but if the map were to continue off the top of the screen, Hollywood Boulevard would be just above that. In the middle of this map, there's a small street called Vista Del Mar that kind of goes north and then forces you to go east. The red arrows that you see here are the path of travel that Mr. Mayers took that evening. So it starts at that mid-block location on Argyle, continues down to Selma, and then up Vista Del Mar, around that corner, all the way to El Centro, and then he made a left turn on El Centro and went above, off the map. The numbers in the red boxes that you see here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are the 4 different locations where the police were ultimately able to recover surveillance video from. There are 4 different locations. Attached to each one of those locations, you'll see the green triangle and the green, with a green arrow in the middle. And what that represents is very roughly, this is not meant to be, exact, but very roughly the direction that a camera attached to that building was facing. You will also hear that locations 1, 2, and 4 captured video only. But you will hear that the location with the number 3 captured both video and audio. So I told you there's 2 incident locations, 2 altercations that happened. The first happens where the yellow box is right now, right outside of that parking garage. The second happens at that corner of Selma and Vista Del Mar. And that's where the firearm was actually discharged, where the gunshots were fired. So the first location I want to focus on is that where the initial confrontation happens. This location is the entrance and exit of a parking structure. This is that parking structure entrance if you were standing in Argyle and you were facing towards Selma. So Hollywood Boulevard would be to your back. And the entrance is on the left-hand side there. And what you will see in the videos, this parking lot entrance has those hanging indicators from the roof that tell you how tall the garage is, so that if you are driving a tall car, you don't, of course there's a fly buzzing around me, you don't run your car into the roof of the parking structure. And I point that out because when you watch the video, you'll actually see that red indicator as a kind of a line through the video, so you know what that is. At the mouth of that parking entrance, there are cameras that are facing the sidewalk. Those are the first view that we saw. And these cameras capture the initial encounter between the victim, Mr. Ephron, who you see there, and the defendant, Mr. Mayers. And you can see that Ills is the first one to intervene to try to separate the 2 of them. And then at the very bottom of the screen, you see 12E putting his hand to try to also intervene and help separate them. Now I know it goes by quickly, and you're not as familiar with all these people, so I want to kind of break it down a little bit for you and show you what the evidence that you're going to receive throughout this case. The first person that you see in that video is the victim, Mr. Ephron. The second person who you see, who is instantly confrontational with Mr. Ephron, is the defendant, Mr. Mayers. You see on the video that Mr. Mayers is immediately aggressive towards Mr. Ephron. He's pulling at Mr. Ephron's sweatshirt, and he's pushing Mr. Ephron backward and pushes him off camera, out of camera view. The third person that you see, as I told you, is Elijah Ulanger, who also goes by ASAP Ills, or he might just be referred to as Ills throughout this. If you look closely, you can actually see his stage name embroidered on the jacket that he's wearing there. And what he attempts to do is to de-escalate this situation, to get between the two men and to physically separate them. And you'll see that all three of them go off screen for a period of time. Mr. Ephron will tell you that during the period of time that they are off screen is when the defendant first produces that semi-automatic pistol from his waistband. He pulls it out of his waistband and he's holding it to Mr. Ephron. Mr. Ephron will tell you that the defendant pointed the gun at his chest and was essentially trying to point the gun around Ills, who was between them. That at the time that he was pointing the gun at Mr. Ephron, he was also threatening Mr. Ephron. I'm going to kill you. Keep in mind, these men have known each other for a long time. And Mr. Ephron will tell you, in his state of mind, he never believed that he was going to be shot. He never believed that the defendant would actually shoot him. He will tell you that had this been a stranger, someone he didn't know as well, he would have been petrified. As you can imagine, anyone pointing a gun at you would upset you. But he knows the defendant. He knows that Mr. Mayers is not going to shoot him. He knows so much so that he'll tell you he looked at the defendant and said, if you brought a gun, you should shoot it. That's how confident he is that he knows the defendant is not going to pull that trigger. Now, the fourth person you can barely see on this video as they come back into frame, I told you, is Jamel Phillips, who goes by 12E or ASAP 12. And you can just see his hand at the very bottom of the screen. When they come back on screen, and specifically when Mr. Mayers comes back on screen, you can see the gun in his hand. You will hear that that gun that he's holding is a semi-automatic pistol, or has features that are consistent with a semi-automatic pistol. Right now, as it's paused on the screen, you can see that he's holding that gun behind his back. But you will also see the gun come forward in front of his body before he ultimately tucks it back into his waistband. And you will see from the video that there were bystanders. As I said, this is a busy Saturday night in Hollywood, walking by as this confrontation is taking place. You will hear that right after that encounter that you saw, that Mr. Mayers walked away and was walking down Argyle towards Selma. Mr. Ephron will tell you that as he walked away, he looked over at 12E, Mr. Phillips, and he saw 12E putting a pocket knife away. And Mr. Ephron, and then 12E, Mr. Phillips, walked behind the defendant, Mr. Mayers, and Ills walked behind him as well. So the three men that had come to confront Mr. Ephron walked away down Argyle towards Selma. And Mr. Ephron will tell you that at that moment, his mindset about the initial confrontation changed. I told you that Mr. Ephron will tell you when he first went there, he believed that this was meant to be a confrontation so that they could strengthen their relationship. But having just had a gun pointed at him and seeing another friend putting away a pocket knife, that his mindset changed, and he understood these men never came here to try to make peace with him, that it was always meant to be a confrontation. And he decided at that moment that having a gun pointed at him was sort of a bridge too far in their friendship, and he understood he was probably never going to have the same friendship, especially with the defendant, ever again. And you will hear that as the defendant walked away, Mr. Ephron followed behind him and was yelling and screaming at him, even though he knew the defendant had a gun. Because although Mr. Ephron believed this is going to damage our relationship, he still never believed that the defendant would actually shoot at him. It's not as if Mr.